Laura gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her knuckles turning white as the HOA manager approached. The ramp leading up to her front door had been there for years, a necessary accommodation she never thought would cause such an uproar. "Mrs. Sanchez, I'm afraid we've received several complaints about your ramp. It's unsightly and doesn't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood," the manager said, his voice dripping with false concern. Laura felt her blood boil. "This ramp is a legal requirement. I'm disabled, and I needed to access my own home." Her eyes narrowed, daring him to challenge her. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "Be that as it may, the HOA has certain standards that must be upheld. I'm afraid you'll need to remove the ramp within the next 30 days or face a fine." Laura's jaw tightened. "I won't be removing anything. This is my home, and I have a right to reasonable accommodations." She wheeled herself closer, her gaze unwavering. "If you fine me, I'll sue the HOA for violating the Fair Housing Act." The manager's eyes widened, and he took a step back. "Now, let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can discuss a compromise." "There is no compromise," Laura interrupted, her voice sharp. "Either you leave me alone, or you'll be hearing from my lawyer." She wheeled herself back, leaving the manager to stare after her, his face pale. As soon as he was gone, Laura's shoulders slumped. She hated confrontation, but she knew her rights. Pulling out her phone, she dialed a familiar number. "Elijah, it's me. The HOA is trying to force me to remove my ramp." Her voice wavered, betraying her frustration. Elijah, her colleague and close friend, responded with a sigh. "I was afraid this might happen. Don't worry, Laura. We'll handle it." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I already told them I'll sue if they try to find me. They backed down for now, but I have a feeling this isn't over." "Good. Stand your ground, and don't let them intimidate you." Elijah's tone was firm, but there was a hint of concern. "I'll start gathering the necessary documentation and prepare a letter to the HOA. We won't let them get away with this." Laura felt a surge of relief. "Thank you, Elijah. I don't know what I'd do without you." "That's what friends are for," he replied with a chuckle. "I'll be in touch soon. Try to relax in the meantime, okay?" "I'll try," Laura said, though she knew relaxation would be difficult. As she hung up the phone, she gazed out the window, her mind racing. She'd had spent years fighting for her rights, and she wasn't about to back down now. This was her home, and she would defend it to the bitter end. The next morning, Laura awoke with a renewed sense of determination. She knew the HOA wouldn't back down easily, but she was prepared to fight. As she wheeled herself to the kitchen, she noticed a bright yellow envelope on the counter. Her heart sank when she recognized the HOA's logo. Bracing herself, she opened the envelope and scanned the contents. "They fined me $500, she muttered under her breath, her fingers gripping the paper tightly. Unbelievable. Laura quickly dialed Elijah's number, her fingers trembling with anger. "They fined me, Elijah. $500 for not removing the ramp." Her voice was laced with frustration. Elijah's response was immediate. "I was expecting as much. Don't worry, we'll get this overturned. I've already drafted a strongly worded letter to the HOA board, outlining their violation of the Fair Housing Act." Laura felt a sense of relief wash over her. "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." "Of course. I'll hand-deliver the letter today and demand an emergency meeting. We're not going to let them bully you like this." As Laura hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. She hated the idea of causing a scene or disrupting the community, but she knew she had no choice. This was a matter of her fundamental rights. Later that day, Laura watched from her window as Elijah strode up the driveway, his expression determined. She took a deep breath and wheeled herself to the front door, ready to face the HOA board. The meeting was tense, with the HOA members arguing that the ramp was an eyesore, and that they had the right to enforce aesthetic standards. Elijah, however, remained calm and resolute, calmly outlining the legal precedents that protected Laura's right to reasonable accommodations. Mrs. Sanchez has a disability, and the ramp is a necessary modification to her home. Denying her this accommodation is a clear violation of the Fair Housing Act, Elijah stated, his voice unwavering. One of the board members, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Wilkins, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But the ramp doesn't match the rest of the neighborhood. Surely there must be a more discreet solution. Laura couldn't hold back any longer. I'm not interested in a discreet solution, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. This ramp is the only way I can access my own home. I shouldn't have to hide my disability to appease your aesthetic preferences. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Elijah seized the opportunity to drive his point home. The law is clear on this matter. Either you resign the fine and allow Mrs. Sanchez to keep her ramp, or will be forced to take this to court. Mrs. Wilkins glanced around the room, her fellow board members shifting uncomfortably. Finally, she let out a resigned sigh. Very well. The fine is rescinded, and Mrs. Sanchez may keep the ramp. Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the battle wasn't over. As she wheeled herself out of the meeting, she couldn't help but wonder what other challenges lay ahead. As Laura wheeled herself back home, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The HOA board had reluctantly agreed to rescind the fine, but she knew they were far from pleased with the outcome. Elijah was waiting for her on the porch, a sympathetic expression on his face. Well, that went about as well as we could have hoped, he said, offering her a reassuring smile. Laura nodded, grateful for his support. I just can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. They're not happy about being forced to let me keep the ramp. Elijah's brow furrowed. I understand your concern, but we have the law on our side. They know better than to try and push this any further. I hope you're right, Laura replied, her gaze drifting to the neatly manicured lawns and pristine facades of the surrounding homes. This neighborhood means a lot to me, and I don't want to cause any more trouble. Elijah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You're not causing trouble, Laura. You're simply standing up for your rights. Don't forget, you have every right to be here, just like everyone else. Laura sighed, knowing he was right. She'd have fought too hard to get to this point, and she wasn't about to back down now. As the days passed, Laura tried to put the incident behind her and focus on her work. But she couldn't help but notice the occasional sideways glances and hushed whispers from her neighbors. The tension in the air was palpable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA was biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One afternoon, as Laura was returning home from the grocery store, she noticed a team of landscapers working on her front yard. Her heart sank as she recognized the HOA's logo on their uniforms. Panic surged through her as she wheeled herself towards the scene, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and outrage. What are you doing to my yard? She demanded, her eyes narrowing. The lead landscaper, a burly man with a gruff demeanor, turned to face her. We're just doing some routine maintenance, ma'am. Trimming the hedges, mowing the lawn, that sort of thing. Laura could feel her hands trembling as she gripped the armrests of her chair. But you're not supposed to be here. I didn't authorize any work on my property. The landscaper shrugged, an amused smirk playing on his lips. The HOA did. They said it was necessary to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. Laura's blood boiled. This is harassment, pure and simple. I won't stand for it. Before the landscaper could respond, Elijah's voice rang out from the porch. What's going on here? He demanded, his tone sharp and authoritative. The landscaper hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Elijah's presence. We're just doing some routine maintenance, as requested by the HOA. Elijah's eyes narrowed. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. This is private property, and you have no right to be here without the homeowner's consent. The landscaper opened his mouth to protest, but Elijah cut him off. Leave. Now. or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Reluctantly, the landscaper and his team packed up their equipment and shuffled away, their faces etched with resentment. Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the battle was far from over. As the landscapers drove away, Laura turned to Elijah, her expression a mix of gratitude and concern. "Thank you for stepping in, but I have a bad feeling about this. The HOA isn't going to let this go." Elijah nodded, his brow furrowed. "I know. They're clearly trying to intimidate you, but we won't let them get away with it." Laura sighed, her shoulders sagging with the weight of the situation. "I just want to live in peace, Elijah. I don't want to be the center of some ongoing feud." Placing a reassuring hand on her arm, Elijah said, "I understand, but standing up for your rights is important. You're not just fighting for yourself, but for all the disabled members of this community who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect." Laura knew he was right, but the thought of continued conflict with the HOA filled her with a sense of dread. She didn't want to be seen as a troublemaker, but she also couldn't back down. Over the next few days, Laura kept a watchful eye on her property, wary of any further attempts by the HOA to interfere. But as the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood seemed to have settled back into its usual routine. Until one morning, when Laura wheeled herself out to get the mail and found a large envelope on her doorstep. Her heart sank as she recognized the HOA's logo once again. Hands trembling, she opened the envelope and scanned the contents. It was a formal notice informing her that the HOA had filed a lawsuit against her, alleging that the ramp was a violation of the community's aesthetic standards. Laura felt a sense of despair wash over her. She had thought they had put this issue to rest, but now she was facing the prospect of a costly legal battle. Quickly, she called Elijah, her voice shaking. "Elijah, they've filed a lawsuit against me. The HOA is trying to force me to remove the ramp." Elijah's response was immediate. "I was afraid they might do something like this. Don't worry, Laura. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." Laura took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I know, but I'm so tired of fighting. I just want to live in peace, without having to constantly defend my rights." "I understand, but you can't back down now," Elijah said, his voice firm. "This is a fundamental issue of civil rights, and we have to see it through. I'll file a response to the lawsuit right away, and we'll schedule a court date as soon as possible." Laura nodded, knowing Elijah was right. She had come too far to give up now. With a renewed sense of determination, she prepared herself for the legal battle ahead. As she stared out the window, watching the world go by, she couldn't help but wonder how much more she would have to endure before the HOA finally accepted her as a full-fledged member of the community. The court date arrived, and Laura steeled herself for the battle ahead. Beside her, Elijah radiated confidence, his briefcase filled with the evidence they had meticulously gathered. As they entered the courtroom, Laura couldn't help but notice the sea of unfamiliar faces. The HOA board members, their lawyers, and a few of her neighbors who had come to witness the proceedings. The judge, a stern-looking man in his 60s, took his seat and called the court to order. Elijah rose and began his opening statement, his voice clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, the defendant, Mrs. Laura Sanchez, is a disabled member of this community who is simply seeking the right to access her own home. The ramp she has installed is a reasonable accommodation, protected by the Fair Housing Act." The HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, rose to counter Elijah's argument. "Your Honor, the ramp in question is an eyesore that detracts from the overall aesthetic of the neighborhood. The HOA has a duty to maintain property values and ensure a cohesive appearance. Mrs. Sanchez's ramp violates our community standards." Laura watched, her heart pounding, as the two lawyers sparred back and forth, each presenting their case with conviction. Elijah systematically dismantled the HOA's arguments, citing legal precedents and expert testimony on the importance of accessible housing. The HOA's lawyer, in turn, tried to argue that the ramp was an unreasonable accommodation, but Elijah deftly refuted each point. As the hearing wore on, Laura couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in Elijah's performance. He was a skilled and passionate advocate, and she knew she was in good hands. Finally, the judge called for a recess, and Laura and Elijah stepped outside the courtroom to discuss their strategy. "I think we've got a strong case," Elijah said, a hint of a smile on his face. "The judge seems receptive to our arguments, and the HOA's position is frankly quite weak." Laura nodded, but her expression was still tinged with worry. "I hope you're right, Elijah. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Elijah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know it's been a struggle, Laura, but you're doing the right thing. This is about more than just your ramp. It's about setting a precedent for disabled members of this community. We can't let the HOA get away with this kind of discrimination." Laura sighed, knowing he was right. She had come too far to back down now. As the recess came to an end, they returned to the courtroom, bracing themselves for the judge's ruling. The tension in the air was palpable as the judge began to speak. "After carefully considering the arguments presented by both sides, I have reached a decision." Laura held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "The court finds in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Laura Sanchez. The ramp is a reasonable accommodation, and the HOA is hereby ordered to cease any further attempts to interfere with its use." A wave of relief washed over Laura, and she felt a surge of gratitude towards Elijah. They had won, and she could finally breathe easy in her own home. As they left the courthouse, Laura couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. This was a victory not just for her, but for all those who faced similar battles against discrimination and intolerance. The victory in court was a bittersweet one for Laura. While she was relieved to have the legal battle behind her, the lingering tension in the neighborhood weighed heavily on her mind. As she wheeled herself down the sidewalk, she couldn't help but notice the occasional glares and whispers from her neighbors. It was clear that the HOA's animosity had not dissipated, and she knew that the battle was far from over. Elijah, ever the steadfast ally, could sense Laura's unease. "I know this has been a tough fight, but you should be proud of yourself. You stood up for your rights, and you won." Laura nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I know, but I can't help but feel like an outsider in my own community. The HOA may have lost in court, but they're still making my life difficult." Elijah frowned, his brow furrowing with concern. "What do you mean? Has the HOA been doing anything else to harass you?" Laura sighed, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. "It's little things, really. Delays in processing my maintenance requests, accidentally missing my house when they do neighborhood cleanups, that sort of thing. It's nothing I can prove, but I can feel the resentment radiating from them." Elijah's expression darkened. "That's unacceptable. We need to document every instance of harassment and file a formal complaint with the authorities." Laura shook her head wearily. "I don't know, Elijah. I'm just so tired of fighting. Can't we just let this go and try to live in peace?" Elijah placed a hand on her arm, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering determination. "Laura, you can't let them win. This is about more than just your ramp. It's about your fundamental rights as a disabled person. If we let them get away with this, it sets a dangerous precedent for the entire community." Laura knew he was right, but the thought of prolonged conflict filled her with dread. "I just want to be left alone, Elijah. Is that too much to ask?" Before Elijah could respond, a familiar figure approached them. Mrs. Wilkins, the stern-faced HOA board member. "Mrs. Sanchez," she said, her tone dripping with false cordiality. "I see you're still enjoying your accommodations." Laura felt her hackles rise, but she tried to remain calm. "Yes, Mrs. Wilkins, I am. The court ruled in my favor, and I'm entitled to keep the ramp." Mrs. Wilkins' lips curled into a thin smile. Of course. We're all about following the law here, aren't we?" Elijah stepped forward, his stance protective. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Wilkins?" Mrs. Wilkins' gaze shifted to Elijah, her eyes narrowing. "No problem at all, Mr. Sanchez. We're simply trying to maintain the aesthetics of our lovely neighborhood. I'm sure you can understand our concerns." Laura could feel the tension building, and she knew they were treading on dangerous ground. "Mrs. Wilkins, if you have any further issues, please take them up with my lawyer. I'm not interested in continued harassment." Mrs. Wilkins' expression hardened, and she turned on her heel, muttering something under her breath as she walked away. As she watched the HOA board member depart, Laura felt a sense of resignation wash over her. She knew the battle was far from over, and she couldn't help but wonder how much more she would have to endure before the HOA finally accepted her as a member of the community. The tense encounter with Mrs. Wilkins left Laura on edge, and she knew the HOA was not going to give up without a fight. Despite their legal victory, the subtle harassment and passive-aggressive behavior continued, chipping away at her sense of security and belonging in the neighborhood. One morning, as Laura wheeled herself to her car, she noticed a concerning sight. Her tires had been slashed. Panic gripped her as she called Elijah, her voice trembling. "Elijah, someone has slashed my tires. I think the HOA is behind this." Elijah's response was immediate. "I'm on my way. Don't touch anything. We need to call the police and file a report." Within minutes, Elijah was by Laura's side, his expression a mix of concern and outrage. Together, they waited for the police to arrive, documenting the vandalism and providing statements. The officer, a seasoned veteran, listened carefully and nodded. "This seems like a clear case of retaliation, ma'am. We'll investigate this thoroughly and see if we can find any evidence linking it to the HOA." Laura felt a glimmer of hope, but deep down, she knew proving the HOA's involvement would be an uphill battle. "Thank you, officer. I just want to feel safe in my own home." As the police officer departed, Elijah turned to Laura, his brow furrowed with concern. "This is unacceptable, Laura. We can't let them get away with this. We need to take stronger action." Laura sighed, the weight of the situation bearing down on her. "I don't know, Elijah. I'm so tired of fighting. Maybe it's time to consider moving somewhere else, where I don't have to constantly defend my rights." Elijah's expression hardened. "No, Laura. You shouldn't have to uproot your life because of the HOA's bigotry. We're going to take this to the next level." Before Laura could protest, Elijah was already making phone calls, his voice urgent and determined. Within a matter of hours, he had secured a meeting with the local civil rights organization, determined to enlist their support in holding the HOA accountable. The meeting was tense, with the civil rights advocates listening intently to Laura's story. They were outraged by the HOA's blatant disregard for her rights and pledged to help build a stronger case against them. "This is a clear-cut case of discrimination," one of the advocates, a passionate young woman, declared. "We'll file a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development and see if we can get the federal government involved." Laura felt a surge of relief, but also a sense of trepidation. She knew that taking on the might of the HOA and the local government would be an arduous and emotionally draining process. As the meeting concluded, Elijah turned to Laura, his expression serious. "Are you ready to take this fight to the next level?" Laura took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Elijah, I'm in. I'm not going to let them push me out of my own home." Elijah nodded, a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "Good. We're going to make them regret ever crossing you." With renewed purpose, Laura and Elijah set out to build their case, determined to hold the HOA accountable for their actions and ensure that Laura's right to a safe, accessible home was protected. The decision to escalate the fight against the HOA was not an easy one for Laura, but she knew it was necessary. With the support of the civil rights organization and Elijah's unwavering commitment, she steeled herself for the battle ahead. Over the next few weeks, they meticulously gathered evidence of the HOA's discriminatory actions, the vandalism, the petty harassment, and the blatant disregard for her legal rights. They compiled a detailed dossier, ready to present their case to the authorities. The day of the HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, investigation arrived, and Laura felt a mix of anxiety and determination as she wheeled herself into the meeting room. Elijah stood by her side, a reassuring presence. The HUD investigator, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, listened intently as Laura and Elijah laid out their case. She pored over the evidence, her brow furrowing as she took in the extent of the HOA's misconduct. This is a clear-cut violation of the Fair Housing Act, the investigator declared, her voice stern. The HOA has systematically discriminated against Mrs. Sanchez and denied her the reasonable accommodations she is entitled to. Laura felt a surge of relief, but she knew the battle was far from over. The investigator continued, "We will be filing a formal complaint against the HOA and recommending swift action to address this issue. However, I must warn you, they may try to retaliate further in the meantime." Elijah nodded, his expression grim. "We're prepared for that. We won't back down, no matter what they throw at us." The investigator offered a tight-lipped smile. "Good. This is a fight worth fighting. I'll be in touch with updates, but in the meantime, I strongly advise you to document any further incidents and report them immediately." As they left the meeting, Laura felt a mixture of emotions: apprehension, relief, and a renewed sense of determination. She knew the HOA would not go down without a fight, but she was more resolute than ever in her stance. True to the investigator's warning, the retaliation from the HOA intensified in the weeks that followed. Laura's mailbox was repeatedly vandalized, her lawn littered with dog feces, and her driveway blocked by anonymous vehicles. Each time, Elijah was there to support her, helping her document the incidents and file reports with the authorities. The civil rights organization also remained steadfast in their commitment, providing legal guidance and public relations support. Finally, after months of escalating tensions, the HUD investigation reached its conclusion. The HOA was found guilty of egregious Fair Housing Act violations and ordered to pay a significant fine, as well as make substantial modifications to their policies and procedures. As the news spread, the neighborhood erupted in a mix of outrage and relief. Some of Laura's neighbors, who had previously turned a blind eye to the HOA's actions, now expressed remorse and a newfound respect for her tenacity. Laura, for her part, felt a sense of vindication, but also a tinge of sadness. The battle had taken a toll, both emotionally and physically. Yet, as she looked out over her home, the familiar ramp standing tall, she knew it had all been worth it. In the end, Laura's unwavering commitment to her rights had not only secured her own access to her home, but it also paved the way for greater accessibility and inclusivity in the entire community.